Well, good morning, afternoon, evening for everybody who's joining. Thank you for joining in so far. I'm excited for this webinar presentation by Sam. Before we begin with that, I just wanted to give a quick introduction to DSIAC, the Defense Systems Information Analysis Center. My name is Brian Benish with DSIAC, and just give you a quick overview of who we are. We're a DoD entity. We exist organizationally under DTIC, supporting the DoD research and engineering community by conducting information research on a variety of technical topics in our domain. We have technical folks on staff that are here to help you find information that you need to conduct whatever research or engineering effort you're working on. And ultimately, we're trying to make connections, make sure people find information, and hosting webinars is one way that we do that to make sure there's an awareness throughout the DoD community about work that's being done or research that is out there, so you can leverage that for your work. And so again, we're excited to have Sam here to present this topic for us. So just another real quick bit before we get into Sam's presentation, some brief logistics about the webinar. And for those who are joined in via the web browser, you should be able to identify at the top of the screen is a little dialog box. If you hover over it about audience questions, at any time during the presentation, if you have a question, I would encourage you to click that, enter your question there, and then we'll do a little Q&A portion at the end in the order that they were received. I will distinguish that from the chat, which is on the left side of your screen. You can enter your questions. Well, the chat is reserved just for chatting with the presenters and whatnot. If you really have a question, please enter it through that question portal that was, again, you can get to from the top and middle of the screen. And then for those who are dialed in just by phone, if you need to download the slides, they're available to download on the webinar webpage. So if you went to DSIAC.org, went to our webinars page and found this webinar, you'll find a link there to download the slides, and you can follow along that way. And then last but not least, if you have any technical issues during this presentation, rest assured we're recording the presentation. We'll be able to get this out to you later, and you can watch it at your own leisure. So without further ado, I will hand the time over to Sam for introduction to himself and his presentation. So Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks to DSIAC for organizing this event. I appreciate everyone who dialed in and who are here on video. I look forward to talking to you today about a very interesting topic, a topic that's been lately in the news and a topic that occupies a lot of Department of Defense and NATO attention, and that is the Russian artificial intelligence research, development, testing, and evaluation. A few words about what I do. I work for Center for Naval Analysis. We are a federally funded research and development center. We are serving U.S. Department of Navy and other U.S. defense agencies. We work on a variety of topics. And within the Russia team where I am located, we are looking at various aspects of Russian military technology development and use in combat. So we're looking at the defense industrial complex, the actual weapons developments, we're looking at systems, we're looking at how they're used, why they're used. And within that work, my portfolio involves military autonomy, robotics, and artificial intelligence development. I'm also an adjunct senior fellow at this Center for New American Security, where I work pro bono on Russian unmanned military systems and AI. So today I will discuss Russian AI and autonomy developments, and I just want to highlight a very important point. In a couple of weeks, CNA Russia team will be releasing a report, a public pre-report called Russian AI and Autonomy Developments. It will be a very comprehensive report that will look at the military, security, and civilian developments in AI and artificial intelligence. So a lot of the aspects that I will discuss today are actually highlighted and discussed in that report at length and in more detail. So towards the end of the presentation, I'll have the link where you will be able to locate the report once it goes public. A few words about Russian military AI as we start off this discussion. There are multiple definitions within the Russian MOD of what AI and autonomy is. There is an official MOD definition. There's a definition that is also used by military experts, as well as the Russian military community. But one of the more important ones is the current trend in discussion of both AI and autonomy of the digitization and the intellectualization of the Russian military force and the weapon systems. And so in short, and you see the definition in front of you, the digitization basically implies a greater share of various aspects of information technologies and communication technologies of advanced IT technologies introduced into the Russian military, which in turn should lead to the intellectualization as the next step of Russian military weapons systems, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And so intellectualization is essentially an advanced stage of digitization and involves widespread use of artificial intelligence that is capable of performing creative functions that are normally considered the prerogative of a person. So throughout the presentation, I will be alluding to various discussions amongst the Russian military community and amongst the Russian military expert community on artificial intelligence. Just keep in mind these two definitions. As we look at the Russian military artificial intelligence and the automation, we have to consider what Russians think and what the Russian military places the emphasis on. And so in 2018, one of the Russian agencies that I will go over in more detail later on, the Advanced Research Foundation, which is the Russia's equivalent of DARPA, essentially introduced 4 AI principles. That is, 4 major principles that artificial intelligence should be developed for the Russian military going forward. And that includes image recognition, it includes speech recognition technologies, it includes control of autonomous weapon systems, and AI in weapons lifecycle and logistics. Now, these were the 4 principles that were announced that the ARF is introducing for the MOD. We essentially trace the development of these 4 principles throughout the AI and autonomy development lifecycle going forward. But again, it was one of the more public and more definitive examples of how and where Russian MOD will be placing the emphasis on AI and autonomy development. Another very important aspect in Russian MOD's discussion of testing and evaluation of artificial intelligence is the emphasis on the human-in-the-loop approach to AI and autonomy developments. Multiple Russian military officials, civilian officials, as well as the expert within the military-industrial community are discussing the eventual evolution of Russian military autonomy and AI as going from that is controlled by a human towards eventual actual autonomy. And so we have on one hand announcements such as the ones that were made during the Army 2020 Military Expo last summer, that humans will be firmly in control of AI and autonomous weapons and systems, that such systems do not function without the role and involvement of humans, and that the MOD will make sure that humans will make the final decision in how AI military will be used, or rather how AI will be used in the military. On the other hand, we have an emerging body of literature and discussions, and as well as multiple expert community discussions that eventually Russian military will field fully autonomous weapon systems. And so if the Russian military doesn't want its soldiers dying in combat, if it wants to safeguard lives, if it wants to make missions more effective, it will eventually have to field fully autonomous systems. And these statements are coming again from Russia's DARPA-like organization, Advanced Research Foundation, as well as from its high-ranking military officials who are considering AI and full autonomy for the military systems as the absolutely important element in the survival of and the evolution of the Russian military systems. Artificial intelligence is discussed writ large in information warfare. The first major public statement was made in 2018 by the Deputy Defense Minister Yuri Borisov, who says that AI will be absolutely essential for cyber warfare and information warfare. But we're not getting actually a lot of facts that are available in the open sources. What we do have is a lot of the discussions and the definitions within the MOD on the importance of information warfare against the United States, against NATO, or against adversaries writ large. In other words, Russia sees itself as a target of a consistent and persistent information warfare campaign that is targeting the military, that is targeting the civilians. Russia sees itself on the receiving edge of the vast torrents of data. And so in order to manage and counter such information initiatives, in order to understand the information that is targeting Russia's population, military and civilian populations, Russia needs to use artificial intelligence to sift through the information, to find proper ways of countering it, and to essentially issue a targeting response to the information warfare campaigns. And so the information warfare is part of the larger subtext of cyber warfare and electronic warfare, Russian military capabilities, which I'll allude to in a couple of minutes. Artificial intelligence is also described in nuclear weapon systems. Again, we have multiple statements available in the open sources on the importance of artificial intelligence writ large, not just for Russia, but for the United States, on the application in the early warning systems, in second strike capability, in the ability to target the adversary, and in collecting and analyzing the geopolitical and the geostrategic situation that would lead to the possible release and use of nuclear weapons. Russian military is basically mum on how AI will be used in nuclear weapons from the technical standpoint. But when it comes to the public discussions, we're getting a lot of information that Russian military thinks artificial intelligence should be aiding decision-making capacity prior to and during the analysis of nuclear weapons use, the eventual nuclear weapons use. So there's multiple statements about how artificial intelligence systems and tactics should be used to sift through vast amounts of data that should be able to determine properly whether or not nuclear weapons should be used and released. We're also seeing how artificial intelligence is playing a role in the current new crop of Russian nuclear weapon systems that were announced by President Putin back in 2018, which involved the Burevestnik, the Avangard, the Sarmat, the Kinzhal, and other systems. And for systems like Avangard, for example, its developer stated publicly that artificial intelligence in the Avangard weapon systems would be able to allow Avangard to determine the best path to target on its own before it is launched, since communicating with a hypersonic weapon like that would be very difficult once it is actually in the flight stages. So we're getting a lot of signals and we're getting a lot of discussions that AI ultimately is becoming a decision-making aid, both for the early warning and second strike capability, as well as for some of the nuclear weapons that Russians are developing. Artificial intelligence is playing an increasing role in Russian military's C4ISR capabilities. And I'm going to list three specifically here. I'm already alluding that artificial intelligence is becoming an important element in a decision-making capacity for the Russian military. And nowhere is that visible more than in the National Defense Management Center. That is the Pentagon-like facility that opened in 2014 in the Russian Federation to combine all the data and all information on all Russian military systems, units, weapons, tactics, both in the deployed stages internationally and domestically. In other words, the National Defense Management Center is supposed to be the all-seeing eye that is supposed to monitor all Russian military activity anywhere where Russian military is present. And recently we've had statements from the MOD establishment, as well as from the National Defense Management Center itself, that artificial intelligence will play an ever-growing role in helping to sift through vast data sets that the NDMC is collecting on a regular basis. So AI will actually be helping NDMC to make proper and best decisions on the fly. The NDMC is also a very important information node for Russia's current operations in Syria. There have been multiple statements that data that was collected by Russian UAVs flying in Syria was actually fed in real time to the National Defense Management Center that was able to observe how Russian military operates in real time. So AI in a decision-making capacity for this very important information node is going to grow in importance. Artificial intelligence is also mentioned in Russian automated control systems. That is, the systems that combine disparate information flows from different weapons and systems for one important tactical picture. In other words, automated control systems are playing a growing role in Russia's own definition of and development of the equivalent of American net-centric warfare systems. And there have been multiple tests conducted in the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea and across the Russian territory proper that combined, for example, data from early warning radars, airborne radars, aircraft, missile defense systems, anti-aircraft systems, as well as other elements on the ground and in the air into the single information flow. And according to MOD statements, those information flows were controlled by and augmented with artificial intelligence that allowed operators to make the best decision on what adversary assets to strike and with what weapons. At the tactical level, Russian military is employing a suite of systems, one of which is named Strelets, which allows a soldier on the ground to have a tactical and operational picture of his or her unit, as well as the entire battlefield space where that soldier is located. And recently, Russian military announced that such unified tactical control system has been used not only on the ground, that allowed Russian soldiers to guide its new combat aerial vehicles to targets in Syria, but also in aircraft, for example, with Su-35 aircraft, which computers were able to collect disparate information flows into a single operational picture for the pilot, so that the pilot could make the best decision without getting instructed. So when it comes to C4ISR, Russian artificial intelligence developments are again emerging as a very active decision-making tool. When it comes to autonomy, there have been a lot of developments in the Russian military over the past decade. In fact, the Russian military placed a great emphasis on the development of military robotics in the land, air, and maritime domain. And many of these projects are actually announced as either being developed with artificial intelligence or will eventually acquire artificial intelligence for C4ISR and other command and control capabilities. In Syria, Russia tested several unmanned ground vehicles for demining and combat operations, acquiring very important lessons of how such military systems are going to be used. And this month, the Russian military announced that it is actually forming a first unit made up of 20 Uran-9 combat UGVs. It will develop tactics, techniques, and procedure for the use, and will train the crews on how such weapons should be used, either in a group setting or integrated in other military units. There have been multiple unmanned aerial vehicle developments in Russia, both in ISR capacity as well as recently in combat capacity. In Syria, Russian military was very successful in using its multiple UAVs for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. One thing that they sorely lacked were the combat UAVs that would strike targets once those targets were identified. And so today, Russian military is introducing and testing an entire suite of systems that involves an Orion, pictured here, a Охотник that could fly as a loyal wingman to the Su-57 aircraft, Altius long-range UAV that could potentially be part of a group or swarm application in the Russian Navy looking for adversary submarines, as well as multiple other systems. Russian military is pouring very significant resources in the development of unmanned aerial vehicles and is building on the lessons learned in Syria as well as in Nagorno-Karabakh. And when it comes to the maritime domain, Russian military is testing a range of deep water submersibles, unmanned underwater vehicles or uncrewed underwater vehicles for better situational awareness. So last May, almost a year ago, Russian military used Vitis, unmanned underwater vehicle that descended to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of the global ocean. And the MOD claimed that Vitis was actually equipped with artificial intelligence for situational awareness in that environment. Russian military also announced that it used the Galtel small unmanned underwater vehicle for better situational awareness and recon around the Tartus port area around Syria. Russian military is actually discussing in its military academies as well as in public events that it actually wants to field swarms not just of homogeneous unmanned systems like UGVs, UAVs, or maritime systems, but heterogeneous systems. So it is working on the development of concept of operation for urban warfare and other types of warfare that would combine, for example, ground vehicles with unmanned aerial vehicles. The Russian military defense establishment is discussing how all of the Russian maritime systems should be connected with UAVs for kind of a global swarm network that would also cooperate and coordinate its actions with the surface and subsurface and other aerial assets. And so Russian military is investing heavily in autonomy. It is thinking through how swarm applications will be conducted. And artificial intelligence will play an ever-growing role in C4ISR for these systems, most importantly in the command and control. But as I alluded to earlier, today Russian military is trying to reconcile the two realities: the reality that human should be firmly in the loop when controlling these disparate systems or swarm of systems, and the fact that the combat complexity will eventually ensure, or rather force, the Russian hand in developing fully autonomous combat vehicles that can operate on their own. So today, the Russian military is trying to bridge that divide by saying that they are now working from, or rather, they are developing their weapons so that the human can kind of move away from full control or remote control of these systems to actually setting the tasks for the military robotics to accomplish their mission on their own, presumably with the human identifying exactly what could and could not be attacked by these military systems. Military artificial intelligence is also employed in an ever-growing range of Russian military applications. So early warning and radars are actually going to be a very important emergent area for the Russian military development, not just for electronic warfare, where certain AI elements are already used, but also, as I alluded to earlier, in nuclear weapons early warning systems. Russians today are saying that while artificial intelligence will be used in some of the early warning and radar systems for C4ISR, it will not actually be able to have full control of these systems, that a human operator would be able to determine exactly what the systems are tracking and why. Artificial intelligence is also used in military logistics, maintenance, and manufacturing. And there have been multiple statements from the Russian military industrial community, most importantly Rostec, one of the biggest industrial corporations, military industrial entities in Russia, that AI is used, for example, to track quality of steel and materials that are used to produce engines and key components for high-tech weapons and systems. AI for logistics and manufacturing, for example, involves creating a digital twin of a weapon systems, such as an engine, so that Russian military organizations and companies can work through some of the kinks and problems associated with that particular system. The Russian MOD is also talking using artificial intelligence in education as a decision-making tool for Russian soldiers that are learning tactics, techniques, procedures, and systems. And I just alluded to electronic warfare. The EW is going to emerge as one of the most important MOD elements going forward, because the Russian military considers electronic warfare its perfect and only response against the US and American forces' net-centric warfare, and what it sees is the American and Western high-tech dominance. And so not only are lots of resources poured into the general electronic warfare systems development, the Russian military considers AI as a decision-making tool, as a tool that sifts through disparate amounts of data and information that the electronic warfare system tracks, as absolutely essential in, first of all, allowing a human operator to make a quick decision, and ultimately to have these electronic warfare systems operate on their own. One system that has been in the news and that is often cited is Belina, which was tested over 2 years ago with artificial intelligence elements that allow the human operator to make a very quick decision based on lots of data collected by that particular system. We're also seeing artificial intelligence applied in the counter unmanned aerial systems technology. So counter UAV and the counter UAS is a very important complementary set to electronic warfare capabilities. The Russian military learned the lessons from conflicts in Ukraine, in Syria, in Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as in Yemen and around the world. And it has learned that there is an absolutely pressing and key need to defend all forces against persistent threat of unmanned aerial vehicles, both long-range combat and very small and hard to identify regular ISR and loitering munition drones. And so Russian military is developing a range of systems that are capable of managing, jamming, and controlling adversary UAVs. And these counter UAS systems are also emerging as a complementary and important set of electronic warfare writ large across the Russian military. AI will also be used in the Russian medicine, as announced last year at the Army 2020 Military Expo outside of Moscow, insofar as artificial intelligence would, again, be used in similar capacities as it is used in the civilian sector in helping to identify medical causes, illnesses, and sift through large quantities of data. So I will talk briefly about the Russian military AI ecosystem, its research, developing, testing, and evaluation infrastructure. There are two very important nodes that one of which that I mentioned earlier. So one is Fond перспективных исследований, or Russia's equivalent of DARPA. It has the similar mission to American DARPA, although it is much smaller in scope. Its companion organization is the ERA Technopolis, that's the image in the upper right, or ERA Tech City, located on the Black Sea coast. The ERA actually emerged as the focal point for MOD's development of artificial intelligence writ large. In 2018, MOD held a conference together with the Russian Academy of Sciences and the civilian entities called the AI Problems and Solutions. It was the inaugural conference of its kind, where the military and civilians in Russia came together to talk through the development of domestic and international AI. And one of the after-action items following that conference was the opening up of an AI Research and Development Center at the ERA Technopolis. So this center has actually been open in 2019, and it began its research work in the year 2020. ERA and ARF cooperate extensively on research and development projects involving autonomy, swarm, and robotics applications. The ARF is actually home to one specific autonomy project called the Marker. It is a UGV, unmanned ground vehicle, which serves as a test bed for neural net applications, man-on-man teaming applications, and UGV UAV teaming applications. Another important entity is the Rostec. That's the image on the upper left. That's the Russian Technologies Corporation. It has over 700 subsidiaries and is Russia's biggest defense industrial conglomerate. And Rostec is conducting an enormous amount of research, development, testing, and evaluation in artificial intelligence, both for the military and for the civilian sector as well. There are multiple other entities, such as the Rostec subsidiaries, as well as Russia's universities, that are also involved in some form or another in the military AI and autonomy developments. I have to mention here a very important point. Absolutely all Russia's top universities right now are state-funded schools. In fact, many of them have the word federal or state in their name. And so federal money funds a lot of the high-tech RDT&E, which now involves artificial intelligence. We're seeing more and more universities across Russia announce that they're opening up an AI research and development lab. And some universities are actually stating publicly that they're working with MOD or Rostec on development of military AI and autonomy applications. The two that come to mind are Southern Federal University, which is working on unmanned systems swarm applications, and Voronezh State University, which is going to work on AI in electronics components, which is funded by Rostec. And so this is a very interesting pattern to watch. As we look at how Russian military will develop and test AI, we will be essentially trying to see if Russia's very important and very capable STEM community, science, technology, engineering, mathematics community, in its universities is actually going to cooperate with the military, both publicly or perhaps on classified projects. There are certain challenges that face Russian military AI and autonomy developments, and I think it's important to note them here. So one is the lack of a high-tech expertise writ large. That is, Russian defense industrial companies and some of its best universities, in fact, have a lot of workers. But overall, Russia lacks the volume that is present in the United States or China or in other countries. There's simply not enough experts to work on AI and machine learning applications for the military and for the civilian sector. And so this is something that the Russian government is trying to mitigate via its national AI roadmap and a national AI strategy that it has begun working on starting October of 2019. In other words, trying to develop enough high-tech and artificial intelligence expertise that would fill the demand at home and make Russia more competitive abroad. Another very important item to note is the import substitution drive for domestic high-tech and electronics components. The Russian microelectronics industry, which is so essential for the development of autonomous systems and for other high-tech development and evaluation, has practically been decimated after the end of the Cold War. So Russian community, rather, or Russian military, Russian civilian environment has to rebuild its microelectronics industry almost from scratch. And today, many parts of the MOD, and in fact, many Russian actual systems that have been built are dependent on imported components. So the import substitution is a very important element for the MOD to make Russia truly independent and competitive in the high-tech space writ large, especially when it comes to AI and autonomy. And so today, there are MOD requirements that a system, if it were to be acquired by the military, must have all domestic components or an absolute minimal of imported components. So this drive is uneven, but it is very important for the MOD, and it is pouring a lot of resources into that. The Russian military enterprises are also forced by the government to become more competitive at home and abroad by developing civilian technologies. In other words, Russian military thinks that if there is an issue that may limit the access to federal funding for these military industrial corporations, they should be able to be competitive by producing domestic high-tech systems and products. And again, in that, they actually face a lot of competition from abroad, such as from China and, of course, from the West. There are also legal and regulatory issues. I've alluded to some of the ethics concerns involving Russian military's discussion of whether a human should be in the loop when it comes to full autonomous and AI-enabled weapon systems. And so the civilian community, the civil society especially, is involved in very poignant and public discussions on the legal and regulatory issues related to the implementation of AI in the Russian society. Now, the military, of course, is going to be a bit more opaque, and it is going to classify a lot of this research. But the MOD is concerned with the ethics of military use. Finally, and this is something that I alluded to in the previous slide, there is growing cooperation with academia and industry. But this cooperation is uneven to the point that last year, during the 2020 Army conference that I mentioned earlier, one of the MOD officials actually asked for more cooperation with the Russian civilian entities, which may be farther along in development of certain AI and artificial and AI and autonomous applications, systems, and technologies. So I opened up this presentation with a statement that my team, my Russia team at CNA, is working on a big AI report that should come out in a couple of weeks. For the past year, my team has actually been producing an AI in Russia newsletter every 2 weeks, where we gathered some of the more interesting stories on the military and civilian developments in AI and autonomy. And those newsletters are available on the link that you see before you. If you're interested more in what the Russia Studies program is doing, I'm also showing you the link to our program. So I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to debating with you the importance of Russian AI and military autonomy. Thank you.
Sam, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. Really appreciate that. We did get a bunch of questions that came in, so I'm just going to go ahead and present them onto the screen here. And we're going to go through them again in the order that they were received. If at any time there's any other questions that those who are listening in want to submit, again, I'll point you to the top middle of your screen. You can enter it in there, and we'll answer them in the order that they're received until we run out of time. So the first question that came up here, Sam, is, and I'll just repeat these questions just for the sake of those who are dialed in and can't see it. So what is the Russian military degree of trust in AI systems, and how does this compare to the U.S., DoD, or NATO's trust of AI?
That's a great question, and this is something that my team has tried to explore in our report that should be available soon. We're not getting the full picture right now of how Russia sees military AI. That is, we have public statements, which are very important to know, but probably a greater share of the conversations is happening behind the firewalls and in a classified environment. Given that both Russia and Department of Defense and NATO are actually at the beginning stages of exploring of what artificial intelligence actually means for weapons and systems, I would say that a lot of these questions are probably better answered maybe 5 or 6 years from now, when both the United States and Russia are further along. I will note, however, that unlike United States and unlike NATO, where military structures have to be responsible to the civilian elected bodies, to the Congresses and the parliaments, and to the civilian society writ large, Russian military's development of these systems is a bit more opaque and different. In other words, there's a very different relationship between the MOD and the Russia's parliament, or between the MOD and the Russian society. There's much more trust in what MOD is doing when it comes to weapons developments, and there's an overall thinking that Russia should actually forge ahead and compete on an equal basis with the United States and China when it comes to AI development. So there's greater support for the MOD work writ large, following Russia's relatively and objectively successful campaign in Syria. And so Russian society is supporting what the military is doing and what the MOD is developing. And so I think the degree of trust in AI would be determined probably a bit downrange. But the trust in military's development of systems writ large in Russia is probably on a different level than it is in the United States and NATO. And so I hope that answer was helpful.
That's good. Well, another question here from Michael next, so we'll jump to that one. His second question here was, says Russia has a first use policy for NSNW. Is the comment concerning nuclear use addressing AI targeting and AI-based deployment and use of NSNW?
That's correct. What we're seeing today, again, from public statements, is the emphasis in the MOD on using AI to get as clear a picture as possible on anything that relates to nuclear weapons use and posture. And so AI is a decision-making tool looking at the geopolitical and the geostrategic situation. AI as a tool in helping operators decide what to do with nuclear weapons in the event of war or strike is going to become a very important element. Now, for obvious reasons, a lot of that data and information is rather classified. But again, what we've been able to see in the open sources is the emphasis on AI as a decision-making tool to sift through the uncertainty of information leading up to nuclear weapons consideration.
All right. So the next question, I think you've alluded to it during the presentation. This came in earlier, but has there been any discussion of AI ethics in Russia?
Absolutely. We're seeing tons of that discussion happening in the civilian space. In fact, I alluded to it a couple of minutes earlier. Russian civil society, Russian parliament, Russian high-tech companies, Russian emerging private sector companies are concerned with the ethics of the use of AI, and especially with the data that is collected by government entities. And so in our newsletters that I mentioned earlier, in fact, every newsletter that we have released has some type of an AI ethics discussion or another. And so there's concern from the civil society on how data would be used by artificial intelligence and for what purposes. This is in contrast to a rather muted but still important discussion within the MOD on the ethics of autonomous systems use and on the importance of using AI in especially in military robotics.
Oh, that's good. All right. Next question is, I guess, about an earlier, the AI principles you brought up at the beginning. So could you briefly reiterate the 4 AI principles again?
Yes, I can. So these are image recognition, speech recognition, control of autonomous weapon systems, and control of weapons lifecycle and logistics.
Perfect, easy enough. All right, let me just pause real quick. I got a couple folks who are sending their questions via the chat, and we're doing our best here to copy and paste them in, but I would strongly encourage those, if you do want a question, to make sure it gets through. We don't slip through the cracks here, to submit it through the audience question portal, not the chat. All right, so next question. Are there any open source elements of AI being observed in the current buildup on the border of Ukraine?
That's a very good question. I'm not seeing that discussed publicly, again, for obvious classified reasons. But I think if AI were to be used, it would probably be used in the automated control systems that connect Russia's early warning radars, anti-aircraft systems, aircraft, and its other components. That is, systems that are designed to match and overcome incoming adversarial assets. So I think if AI is used anywhere, it's probably used in electronic warfare systems that may be deployed, and in automated control systems.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, next question came in here is, so how is the MOD intending to use AI in ships and submarines? And would environmental conditions negatively impact the maritime platforms?
That's a great question. I've alluded to the fact that Russian military wants to use AI and machine learning in unmanned maritime vehicles and systems. When it comes to actual ships and submarines, we're getting some information on how artificial intelligence and machine learning can augment surface vessels' command and control capabilities. That is, minimizing the human input or even minimizing the size of the crews by automating multiple functions on the surface ships. I haven't seen AI and submarine mentioned in the same sentence yet, but stand by.
So absolutely. All right. So the next question is, based on your research, which Russian AI capability is the most robust and therefore the biggest threat?
I would say it's AI capability in C4ISR and electronic warfare. This is where Russians have practiced. This is information that Russians have made public. Russians have practiced combining multiple elements, surface, aerial, ground, and early warning radar elements in the Black Sea, in the Caspian Sea, and across Russia. But close behind, I think, or up next is Russia's AI capability in, for example, manned-unmanned teaming and in UAV, UGV cooperation. This is something that both the ERA Technopolis and Advanced Research Foundation are working very hard on.
Yep. All right, next question is an interesting one. How can we, or can we, or do we know how to quantify the amount of yearly investment Russia is placing in AI, either in total dollars or percentage of their GDP?
Great question. I was actually waiting for that. So when it comes to civilian AI developments, there's a lot of transparency. And our report will cover that in some detail. And our newsletters, which you can locate on the CNA Russia Studies Program webpage, also alludes to that. Recently, Russian civilian entities that are tasked with overseeing the civilian AI development have mentioned that, for example, there are 350 times fewer investments in Russian AI developments than in China. There's a lack of government investment in AI development writ large, especially for the civilian sector. And there's a lot of the government interest and a lot of the government efforts to spur the AI development are relatively new. So obviously compared to more mature efforts in the United States or in China or elsewhere in Western Europe, for example, in Asia and the Middle East, Russia lags behind. That doesn't mean it cannot already produce results. Again, a lot of Russian military developments are behind a firewall and are rather opaque. And so just because the civilian sector doesn't get enough funding doesn't mean that the military doesn't. But we can actually quantify the cost of some of the military autonomous systems that Russians are developing. But again, the overall emphasis is that the government should be doing more and the MOD that should be doing more. But right now, Russia is far, far behind in actual investment in RDT&E when it comes to AI and autonomy.
All right. Well, the next question, the longish one, but kind of related here to the comparison between Russia and the U.S. and the AI capabilities. So I'll read it in full and we can kind of address it. But question in full says, the United States retains access to the world's leading commercial ecosystems for artificial intelligence. That is Silicon Valley, New England. It retains access to the world's leading universities in engineering and technical development. It retains access to massive sums of money and an economy that is well diversified, not just oil and gas and internal services. Doesn't the U.S. have the capability to annihilate gains that Russia makes in AI and apply those towards offensive capabilities?
Well, that's a great question. I'll answer with another question, actually. How is it that the United States, with its vast capabilities that are actually noted here, hasn't been able to match Russian electronic warfare capabilities, system for system, capability for capability? And Russia doesn't spend nearly as much on that as the United States. So again, a lot of these advantages are asymmetric. Because of a lot of the AI capabilities are public. In other words, they exist as commercial off-the-shelf technologies. They exist as codes on GitHub and on other systems. One doesn't have to spend a lot of money to try and reinvent the wheel. Russia can actually take already available products and services, especially when it comes to, for example, AI code, and apply it to its own developments. So in this point, there are points for being in second place, to paraphrase a famous quote, right? You don't have to spend a lot to gain a lot now. And Russia doesn't have to compete with the United States or China for that matter, for the first place. It can be firmly behind, and it will actually just absorb a lot of the developments that are becoming public. And again, electronic warfare is a very important example of a very powerful asymmetric capability that allowed Russia to match and defend itself against US advantages in network-centric warfare.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, next question, and kind of easiest one, but you've mentioned your forthcoming report from CNA. What
Absolutely.
will be the classification?
It will be public, and that's what the sponsor wants. So all 250 pages of it, with all of its appendices and charts and graphs, and all of our hard work will become public. And once it goes live on our CNA website, you can download it and read it. So yes, we want to make it public. We want it to generate debate, and we want you to get back to us with your questions, comments, and feedback.
Perfect. Very good. Looking forward to that. And we'll make sure from DSIAC end that when that is out, we'll announce that to our community as well to help further promote it. So if you don't find it directly from CNA, we'll make sure to get it out to you all who are connected with the DSIAC correspondence. All right. Next question. It says, you said the MOD is concerned with ethical use of AI. So what information is available on safety evaluation of AI use? The US and NATO have strict system safety standards. Does Russia also have such standards?
Our assumption is yes. In public statements about weapons testing at the ARF, Advanced Research Foundation, and especially its testing of the marker unmanned ground vehicle and its various applications with AI and military autonomy, Russians are actually talking about the aspects of safety and other important elements. Now, some of that information is classified, but some of that information is in fact public. Russians want AI and military autonomy to safeguard lives. And so they're making an effort to develop these systems to safeguard the lives and to make the mission, the human mission, as effective as possible.
Yep. Makes sense. All right. Filing along here. And I believe this might be in your reports. We're not obviously not in this venue. You're going to be able to provide the answer to this question directly, but can you provide open source links to the Bylina EW system?
I invite Arthur to look at our newsletters because each newsletter highlights one specific system, military system that uses either AI or is itself autonomous. And one of our newsletters actually was dedicated to the Bylina EW system. So that information is public.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right, next question. Where do the Russians get the advanced processors for AI, such as their GPUs?
Another question I was waiting for because I actually didn't mention it in the slide where I talked about some of the challenges. So guess what? NVIDIA microchips are very important to Russian AI and autonomy development, both in the civilian, and probably for the military. So right now, NVIDIA microchips and NVIDIA products are freely available in Russia. Now, what it cannot get openly and publicly because of sanctions, which actually have had a very debilitating effect on the Russian high-tech industry, they can get through their secondary or tertiary partners, either through secondary parties in Europe or Asia. So Russian high-tech community actually has access to a lot of the high-tech components that it probably shouldn't have if the sanctions are actually to be in place. But again, Russians have proven very crafty in developing pathways in acquiring some of the systems and technologies that it cannot develop domestically yet.
Okay. Very interesting. So next question here is another one related to T&E from before for test and evaluation. So is there any indication as to what their focus, Russia's focus on T&E is, and how do they tie, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but how do they tie their principles to test and evaluation?
Well, when it comes to autonomous systems, for example, the testing and evaluation involves the greatest degree of autonomy and the greatest situational awareness and the orientation in an uncertain environment. And the same obviously applies for AI for example, early warning systems, EW systems, counter-UAS systems. The point that Russia is driving at is whether AI can in fact be as close a substitute to a human reasoning and decision-making as it can. Now, we're getting mixed messages, as I alluded to earlier, from the military community when it comes to full autonomy application. So some Russian military experts, some actually Russian military officials, are saying that it probably will not be possible because AI and machine learning data sets cannot replicate fully the experience of a human operator. In other words, the combined human experience that is probably many decades old that forms the decision-making core of a human commander, right? That cannot be replicated fully. And so AI probably will not be able to be as precise as some of the designers want. However, when it comes to sifting through large quantities of data and providing the most optimal outcome is something that the MOD is driving at when it comes to its testing and evaluation.
Oh, very good. All right, we had a question that came in just after this. I kind of removed it, but it was just asking how this presentation would be available and if it's being recorded. The answer is yes, and we will send out a link to all attendees later on with that to access. So rest assured, it'll be available and sent out. All right. So the next question: what evidence, if any, have you seen concerning cooperation between Russian and Chinese AI developers? If so, which Russian and Chinese organizations are involved?
I've actually done a series of public reports on that when it comes to the civilian Sino-Russian AI and high-tech cooperation. And I've given my contact information in the last slide. So, Michael, if you want to reach out to me directly, I can actually send you links to those reports. And we're seeing more and more cooperation in the civilian sector, especially between the universities and some of the companies. So if you contact me directly, I'll send you the reports that actually outline what your question addresses.
Are those reports published on CNA's website or some other
They're
library?
Actually published on other websites, and they're totally public and unclassified.
Okay, good to know. All right, another comparison here between Russia, U.S., and China. So is it the assumption here is generally felt that Russia is superior to the U.S. and China in the application of AI and cyber?
I don't want to talk in absolutes. I think it's difficult to say right now who is ahead of whom because there are so many different applications that are pursued by different countries. So obviously, Russia cannot match the level of investment by United States and China. It cannot match the existence of a high-tech ecosystem, which is so conducive to the development of AI and machine learning and other applications. And a lot of these developments are at the nascent stages in Russia. I mean, it recently just began funding AI projects, and it just developed government agencies and government entities tasked with sort of AI development and implementation. So I wouldn't necessarily say that Russia is Russia is ahead of U.S. and China in AI and cyber, simply because cyber applications and artificial intelligence applications differ for each of the three countries in question.
Right. Yep. That's fair. Well, what if they collaborated? Next question says, hey, so is there any potential for Russia filling in the gaps you identified by collaborating with China?
Absolutely. The biggest gap is funding. And so on the civilian side, and I alluded to that in the earlier question, there's a lot of cooperation between Russia and China, with Chinese money actually funding Russian STEM universities working on AI, machine learning, and autonomy developments. So that's a very important gap to fill, and China is there to provide it.
Oh, that's good. That's true. All right. Next question, and you kind of addressed part of this already regarding Russian investment in military AI, but what is the scale of Russian investment in military AI relative to A, their overall defense spending, and B, U.S. or NATO spending?
So I alluded to that in one of the earlier responses as well. We can't get a full and detailed picture of Russian military AI investments in ruble terms or in dollar terms. Again, we can get that on the civilian side, and they've been very transparent about how much they're spending in the civilian sector. But it is assumed that the military AI spending relative to the overall defense spending is relatively light and forms a relatively smaller part of the larger sort of high-tech investment. And it is probably much smaller than US and NATO in strict dollar terms. But because Russia doesn't buy its equipment and services in dollars, that is not a proper way to judge, right? We have to look at the results, and we have to look at the asymmetric AI RDT&E that Russia is pouring the resources into. So while we can compare sort of the dollars and cents, and with United States will always emerge at the top, that doesn't necessarily mean that that Russia would be somehow behind in some of the key AI or autonomy capabilities.
Yep, got it. That's good. And next question, if you could maybe speak to this, it's the ethics of the Fedora. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but the Glock shooting robot that's been seen out there. I'm not sure if you're going to speak to the ethics of it or just kind of what that is, but maybe some comments.
All right, so Fedora is Russia's humanoid android. It looks like the skeleton reject from the Terminator movie, and it is a remote control system, meaning a human operator still has to operate it remotely. Fedora went into space to the Russian space station, where it was tested in uncertain hazardous environments. So Fedora was actually developed to work in a hazardous environment, open space, in a nuclear, biological, or chemical spill, or another dangerous environment where a human should not or cannot be used. And so that means that the Fedora, as a humanoid android, should be able to perform or copy as much as possible all of the functions of a human in such an environment, its dexterity, its movement, etc. And so using Glocks was actually a publicity stunt, which actually scared a lot of the companies and organizations overseas, which apparently were supplying a lot of components for Fedora's development. At that point, Fedora was almost 90% made from imported components. That situation has been rectified. But again, Fedora has to replicate human functions as much as possible, including dexterity, including its hands. And so if Fedora can actually shoot straight and accurately, it means that in a hazardous situation, it will be able to be very precise and approximate what a human may actually do with his or her hands.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Let's go look that one up. All right. You mentioned Fedora being in space. So what degree of AI is being used by Russian space forces?
That's a good question. We haven't seen a lot of public data on that, but we can extrapolate that when it comes to early warning, for example, systems, AI will play an important role in C4ISR and in data management. ARF, Russia's DARPA, recently announced that it is launching its own Project Maven. The announcement was made 2 years ago and will involve AI analyzing space-based imagery, probably for the military, but maybe even for the civilian sector. So we're seeing more announcements on how AI is affecting space-based operations, but we're not seeing a lot because of the obvious classified nature of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, and just want to alert everybody, a few minutes here till 1 o'clock, and just to respect everyone's time, we'll try to wrap these questions up in the next minute or two. And if there's any lingering questions, obviously Sam provided his contact information, so you can reach out to him or us to help get them answered. So moving on then, is there a Russian equivalent of the Sea Hunter?
Not yet, but stand by.
Stay tuned. All right, that's a quick one. Jump to the next. Have there been discussions that you know of? Have there been discussions on using lethal autonomous weapons and more generally AI for lethal engagements with the human in the loop, and further removed in Russia?
Yes, absolutely. And I've been actually alluding to that throughout the presentation in bits and pieces, but let me kind of bring it all together. So there's one particular concept that Russians are working on, and that's the marker UGV that has been tested by the Advanced Research Foundation, Russia's DARPA-like organization, for the development of man-on-man teaming applications and for human control. So that's one specific project where a human should be in the loop, or rather on the loop, depending on the situation. Now, the MOD is actually discussing how that concept will evolve from a full human control, or rather from systems being developed as remote controlled, to more autonomy. And that means that a human will be setting the tasks for these autonomous systems, ground, aerial, maritime, for them to accomplish that tasks. Now, we are presuming right now, and I'm sure the MOD is also presuming, that the human operator will be able to identify targets and exclude any potential for collateral damage or damage to the civilians. Again, setting the tasks for a military robotic system to perform its task autonomously is the next stage in the MOD development of both AI and the military autonomy. But a lot of that right now is in the conversation phase. So there are debates, there are discussions, there are hints. There are roundtables on that. We haven't actually seen a lot of the technical capabilities except for that marker UGV testing. And one of our CNA newsletters actually highlights marker UGV testing as well.
Well, that was a great question to kind of wrap up and end with, kind of a future projection of what they're planning. So I'll close out with that one. Again, if there are any other questions, there's opportunities to reach out to Sam or DSIAC, and we can help get those answered for you all. But otherwise, Sam, thanks for the great presentation, for handling all these questions in such rapid fire way. Really appreciate it, and just thank you for your time.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I welcome the further engagement. My contact information is out there. So if you need to reach out, please do. I will respond.
Very good. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you very much.